Alrighty, in the last lecture of the week, we're going to be talking about ritualization. So this can be thought of in a couple different ways. One of them might be sort of the easiest thing to figure out is sort of an individual's rituals surrounding a game day. So if they know that the Cubs are on later today, they wear their lucky socks all day, and they make their nachos at 5:30 for the 6 o'clock first pitch, and they always have to sit in their green lazy boy and have their beer drank with their right hand. All the sort of unusual quirks about a ritual. So that's one way to think about it in terms of individual ritualization, sort of the things that they just do because they think it's lucky for the team. The other way to think about it is in terms of ritual behaviors that are socially built in, so that they're internalized schemes of ways of behavior, and the fans sort of know what to do. So if that same Cubs fan was sitting in the bleachers and the opposing team hit a homer out there, they know they have to throw the ball back. That's just part of the rituals of sitting out there if you're a Cubs fan. Some Butler fans have the ritual, and there's a group of them that dress up for the games, or there are certain cheers that all the Butler student section knows that they have to sort of memorize, and that's part of kind of the internalized scheme of what to do at what time. Packers fans know to wear cheese heads or Packers gear or anything else. Crimson Tide fans for the University of Alabama know to say Roll Tide at just about everything, whether it's a hello Roll Tide, I'm sorry Roll Tide, we'll get them next year Roll Tide, or we won the championship Roll Tide. It can be used for just about anything that you want to use it for. But it's sort of built in as this sort of internalized ritual. A lot of times it's just sort of a heads up to when you see another fan, you say, hey, Roll Tide, and they say Roll Tide back. And so it's all of these socially sort of built up rituals that are really the basis of cultural identity of a sports fan. So the individual side of rituals, it can be, it's Sunday, Bill's watching the Packers in his favorite chair, drinking a beer with only his right hand, wearing head-to-toe Packers pajamas, whatever. But it's the rituals that are more socially built are the ones that are in many ways performative for others, that are built into your identity, or that showcase your identity, I guess, not built into your identity, that show off, this is who I am, this is how you should treat me because I'm this is my identity. So it's a really very very much a performative rituals that we're interested in terms of this piece, or as a way of understanding identity performance. So tailgating rituals, social rituals that with fellow fans of if you have a certain cheer after you hit a home run or after you score a touchdown, and all the fans know it and they all perform the same act together. That's sort of a social ritual. In terms of performance socially, other types of rituals could be the Steelers won this weekend, so Bernie at the office is going to wear his Steelers jersey. That's less about actually consuming the sport, like my example earlier of the Packers fan, and that's more about performing the identity of I'm a Steelers fan because I wear this jersey on Monday after a big win on Sunday. It's less about sort of consuming the actual game itself, and more about presenting this identity to the rest of the world. And I would say most of our sports-related rituals are this sort of social, outward, performance-based type of behaviors. And it might even be to the extent that those individual ones that we're talking about, where it's Sunday, so Bill's watching the Packers, is also a performance. It's a performance to family members, to friends, like, oh, Bill's a diehard Packer fan. He always has to get in his chair on Sundays and watch it. Part of that might also be sort of a performative type of element. But all of the other ones that I was talking about are certainly sort of social performance of things you do with the crowd, things you do sort of after the game is over, 2 or 3 days later, you're still wearing the jersey. All of that is really performance of this is my identity, this is who I am. So if we think about this in terms of earlier lectures, cultural identity in this case, in this reading, is really very much of an outward-in type of system, where the behaviors that we are are doing, or the attitudes that we have, or the performances that we're making are the ones that are defining the identity, rather than having sort of internal identity be the driving force behind our behaviors. In this reading, the behaviors are what's defining our identity. So again, it's a very performative take on identity, this cultural or social identity, very much a performance-based act. So the fan or the individual in society could decide at some point, I want to be a sports guy, or I want to be a big sports fan. So in that case, he basically is just deciding to dance the dance, to do the performance, whatever that performance might be. So that might be, I'm going to be a sports person, I'm going to be a sports fan, I'm going to be known as the sports guy at the office. So I'm going to watch a bunch of NFL games and make sure I talk about them all on Monday so I can be the sports guy. It's really a performance that's driving this identity and sort of an identity goal, rather than it going the other way of I'm just this fan, therefore I watch the games and I talk about the games because that's identity is built inside of me. This is more of treating it as I want to be this, so I choose to watch all these games so I can have this sort of social identity of, oh, that's Bill over there. He's a kind of a sports guy. Similarly, a fan can be very specific with their choices. They could choose the Packers or the Yankees or any other team that they want to choose. And really, regardless of whatever team you cheer for, there's a certain set of rituals that if you just plug those in and you do them long enough with enough sort of devotion, that's what your identity is going to become. So really, it's identity based on the actions that you're taking. Again, a very outside-in conceptualization of the sports fan. In some way, you could think of this as a false identity. So for those that are of the belief that your identity is sort of inside you and is stable and you are who you are kind of mentality, anybody that does anything other than that is presenting sort of a false identity. They're not necessarily a true Packers fan. They're just wanting sort of the social credit or the social value that comes in being like, oh, he's a real big Packers fan, and kind of the sociality and the camaraderie that you might get from that, the social benefit that you get from being a fan of a certain team, but you're not sort of in your heart of hearts a true, air quote, true fan of the Packers. And so the reading continues, and there's a handful of types of ritualization. So these are, if you want to think about it in terms of that false identity and just sort of like, I want to be seen as a sports guy, or I want to be seen as a sort of a huge sports fan or a sports junkie. These are the four ways that you can ritualize to be seen that way. If you want to think of it as sort of a strategic plan. First is formalization. You always do the same thing. So I always wear the team hat on game day. So I always wear the Steelers jersey on the Monday following their win, or the Tuesday if they play Monday night following their win. This is sort of a very methodical, well planned out. You might think of this as sort of the idiosyncrasies of a really sort of deep fan, always wears the same Yankee blue socks on game day kind of thing. So it's a formalized ritual that just you do over and over again. Next is a symbolic performance. So this would be painting chests. This would be something that is showcasing your fan identity to the public. So it's a really very much a social performance that you're putting on. So this would be wearing the jersey in the office, would also work as a symbolic performance. Saying "Roll Tide" as you walk around Tuscaloosa, Alabama, is very much a symbolic performance, especially when it isn't in any way related to a game day. It's very much a symbolic performance, like, hey, I fit in, I'm one of you, and you sort of reap the social benefits of that. The third is once it becomes a sort of tradition. This is where we start tying myths into long-standing rituals. Well, we have to do this. We have to leave this seat open because of the X, Y, and Z over the years, or we have to turn our hats this way in the bottom of the seventh inning because this is what happens. There are 1,000 different myths out there that are tied to long-standing sports traditions, and almost all of these are very much socially known traditions or socially known myths that are tied to these traditions. And the fourth is social interaction. So these are very specific rituals among friends, family, and social groups. So like I was saying, this might start off at the lowest level, is a very sort of individualistic behaviors level, but that is still a performance for close friends and family. Like back to that sort of, oh, it's Sunday, Bill's definitely in his favorite recliner watching the Packers down in his man cave. That's just his ritual. It's what he does. That's still a performance, a social performance. That from that sort of lowest level all the way up to the highest level of doing sort of group behaviors, collective behaviors in the stadium. We all do whatever, the tomahawk chop or something like that, cheering for an Atlanta Braves game. The sort of the larger group level social interactions that, yes, I fit in, I'm doing this, I'm one of you. So that brings us to our final discussion item of this week's lectures. Discussion item 4. Do you have rituals that are related to your favorite teams, perhaps with other fans, or and as you're talking about this, talk about it in terms of sort of the individual level, or things that just you do and your close friends and family know about them, or are they part of sort of this larger social ritual? And second, is there a way to tell the difference between what you might consider a false fan who's simply playing a role, going along with the crowd to get social benefits, from a air quote real fan? So talk about that distinction, if that's even a real distinction between a false fan and a real fan, or if there'd be any sort of real way to tell the difference between the two of them, and how could that happen? So talk about those items, and this is actually the last item, or this is the last slide of this lecture. So once you're done with it, you can post your discussion post and close out of the lecture, and you're good for the week.